Why don't you laugh? It's funny that the vagabond you see could ever have a woman and expect her love for me. But it was so, and for a month or two, her smiles were freely given. And when her loving lips touched mine, I thought I was in heaven. Boys, did you ever see a girl for whom your soul you'd give? With a form like Venus de Milo, too beautiful to live, with eyes that would beat the Kohinoor, and a wealth of chestnut hair. And so it was she, for boys there never was another half so fair.
I think I'll just move it a little bit at 191.
Okay.
Just a hair and see if it's okay.
Without this bar, you'd be fools.
Good. Good. You've done a really good job of learning this. Excellent. Wait, 1, 2. Leave it me. I can begin a man. I can't.
You can't even pay for your own drinks. How can you afford pie? I bet there's a tale behind that.
People said, well, this is a strange place to have an opera company. Well, it is kind of a weird place. But you have to know how it came to be, how the miners built this theater for themselves and loved the building and wanted it preserved, and a few people did what they could to keep the theater going during the bad days.
Let's say when the company was created in the 30s, up through probably the 60s, there was a benefit to being away from the city because, as I said, we were away from the heat. With the advent of air conditioning, people don't have to leave where they are in town to be comfortable.
Lovers, I'm not in the mood. My favorite line. Seems the mountain and skies were all free. The music changes, and you're feeling a little bit of the Twilight Zone quote idea of there's something weird happening here. I'm not real sure what's going on.
Yeah. Hardly ever do you get to work with a composer. We never worked with Mozart, obviously. And so you always have to guess what's the most important thing, what the composer wanted to draw out. It was nice to be able to work with him to see what was important to him.
It's much easier as a composer for them to look up to you for the answer. And they're always surprised when I say, well, let me hear what you feel about it.
When love and art conspire, you will have peace. I red, with green, with gold, and yellow hue.
When the most stable business in the town is an opera company, you know there's something weird going on.
There's something about separation from the speed or the rhythm of a city that allows people to downshift a bit and become more focused and more centered. And I think ultimately that gives them a better place to come from when they walk on the stage. They don't have to go and sit and deep breathe for a half an hour to focus themselves. They're walking around in the mountains and in nature all day, so if they haven't been focused by that, I don't know where else they could go.
My first year of teaching up here, I was renting an apartment which was right next door to opera stars. And so I awakened in the morning with the singing of the scales.
I came out to Colorado in 1975. I've been in the Central City area since about 1981. I got to be in Carmen in '93 as a super. I was a soldier in the first act, and I would go out and drink some beers before I had to be on stage again as the ugly constable, just in the procession. And being in Carmen was just a thrill for me. It was such a, and I was sitting on stage one time, I almost started applauding after one of the songs was sung, and that was the year Joyce Campana played Carmen. Mr. Marty says that one time I was so inebriated I almost walked off into the pit, which would have been pretty disastrous.
He was in the procession in the last act, and I was conducting down there. And along came the procession, and along came Jeff, who suddenly was walking out of line and headed right for the pit. It's like, back! And somehow he managed to get back in line and into the bull ring without causing any disturbance. But he has since given up demon rum. The Opera Association has never been tethered to the town. However, the town has been tethered to the Opera Association.
When gaming came in, we were in a position to take a lemon and turn it into lemonade. We had people in place in the organization that knew how to do those things, and they knew what our assets were, and they knew what people were looking for.
We executed a 30-year lease in this Atella house with a foreign gambling outfit, and got a certain percentage of the drop.
Gaming took away 15% of our audience because people didn't want to come up here if there was gaming.
One of the trademarks of these young singers being really fine musicians and conscientious people is every one of them came in with every note learned, every rhythm learned, and it's such a delight because you can work on the music. Now that's what professionals are supposed to do. Some of them don't. I remember one instance in particular, which I won't mention any names. It was a tenor, didn't know his part. So everybody was pretty upset about that, and he said, I remember his words, I don't know where I was when I learned this, because he thought he knew it, but he didn't. But these young singers came in knowing every rhythm, every pitch, everything. So we were able to work on the music, how it could be sung, the diction, etc., etc. And another thing I noticed, that every time I would give a comment, they would take the pencil and they would write it in the score. Another trademark of a professional.
And it's almost like being shot out of a cannon. I mean, once the show starts, it just goes, and there's no stopping. And I think the impact has a lot to do with the brevity of the piece, because there's really no time to stop and ponder.
Central City was once the central city in Colorado. Gold, that was the first mother lode. The first discovery there was the Gregory lode way back in 1859. And overnight, Central City becomes bigger than Denver, than Golden, than Boulder. It is the epicenter of the Colorado gold rush. So I think a lot of people don't realize that this was the place to be. Now it's a small, struggling, semi-ghost town.
Legend has it that it was, the gold veins were sticking up out of the ground. It was that kind of, it's right here, just pick it up and you're a rich man.
Panhandling man! Panhandling man! 59 a miner out to stake a claim. I came this way from Massachusetts, full of Kansas territory, pick and shovel in my hand, very full of gin and glory. King, you, go let's dig them holes, dig away to save your souls. More buckets of gold than banks can hold, lie deep in Colorado. More buckets, buckets, buckets of gold, lie deep in Colorado. A fine gal is my wife, Augusta, never hope to meet a finer. Ties me to her apron string, hey, I did my rape in China. Dig, you, go first dig them holes, dig away to save your souls. There's rubies and pearls to deck the girls you keep in Colorado. More rubies, pearls, more than girls you keep in Colorado.
Everybody's fascinated with great wealth and getting it fast. And that's what happened here. Baby Doe Tabor, Baby Doe was her last name, came here from Oshkosh, Wisconsin. Ended up in Leadville, which is where all this silver was being found. And came under the attention of Horace Tabor. And they had a huge wedding reception and wedding, which he invited all tout le monde in D.C. to. But Baby Doe was basically considered a strumpet who had stolen Horace from his proper wife. But she stuck by him. She stuck by him until he died. And all that she had left was the land that he'd given her around the Matchless Mine. And the cabin still exists today. In fact, every time we do a production of Baby Doe, John Moriarty has always taken the cast on a road trip to Leadville. The Ballad of Baby Doe is our guaranteed sellout whenever we produce it. More than Bohème, more than Carmen, more than anything else, the Ballad of Baby Doe, because it's so much a part of here, of this history. And Facing the Barroom Floor has a place in that history as well, which is why I think it's done so well here.
Unlike so many boom towns which have been torn down and rebuilt, we still have the 1874 brick Victorian structures. Central City is considered the best preserved town in the state, better than Georgetown or Telluride or Aspen or Silverton, in that you don't have the gaps, the parking lots between structures. You have solid row of buildings all leaning on each other, and a great attention to preservation. Not many people realize that the face on the barroom floor, the bar, is a designated interior historic structure.
Teller House was the first brick hotel in Central City. It opened in 1872. and it was designed to prove that Central City was a permanent mining camp where people could feel safe investing their money. There were originally 80 rooms, all on the 3rd and 4th floor. Single went for $3 a night, and a suite went for $4 a night, so quite a bit more than the 50-cent a night wooden hotels and boarding houses that were in town. There was one bathroom on each floor, but the bathtubs were down in the basement, along with the barber shop and a branch of the Colorado Telephone Company. The interesting thing about the Opera House is that it was paid for entirely with money donated by the people of Central City. There were a lot of Welsh and Cornish miners up here. They were prized for their mining skill, and agents would actually go over to Wales and Cornwall and get them to come over here. And then once they were here, their families would start coming over because they could tell them how great it was and make a lot of money here. And they like their singing and they like their operas. And so they were very interested in having a nice place to have their performances. And then, of course, you have the people of Central City wanting a nice place to have their performances. And altogether, they raised $20,000, which is what it cost to build the Opera House. It opened in 1878. And it was just another piece that made this a permanent town.
There used to be a time before television when recitations were a way to entertain in the evenings. Most good poems improve a little bit when they are heard out loud. It was possible to read a poem out loud which on the page just lies there and ain't too good, but read, a good reader or an actor might inject new life into it. The story is told, of a Russian actress who once gave a performance before a small drawing room audience in New York, and she read something and emoted, and she put passion into her voice. She almost cried at moments. She exulted with joy, and when she got done, someone said to her, "What was that text that you read? Was that Pushkin? Was that some epic?" And she said, "No, that was the Russian alphabet."
The poem was written by this somewhat mysterious man, Hugh Antoine Darcy. That's D', the French Darcy.
Darcy is a mystery man. Nobody knows much about him.
He was a sort of a balladeer poet of the time, late 19th century.
These poems were written by rather professional writers. They are not at all amateurish work like folk poems or folk songs.
He published this, and it had immediate success. By the way, it was then titled The Face on the Floor, not the barroom floor.
His poem, The Face Upon the Floor, as he liked to call it, was seized by the temperance movement to illustrate the evils of strong drink, so that Darcy resented this, and in an interview in 1925 during Prohibition, he remarked that if he thought that his poem had advanced Prohibition, he would take a jump into the Hudson River.
I've since discovered his father was French, his mother was English. He was brought up for a while in England, and then they emigrated to the United States. In any case, he seems to have totally mastered not only the American language, but something of American feel for the American, culture. In the poem, I guess I should say, this derelict vagabond comes staggering into Joe's bar. He asks for a drink. He says he has no money. Other patrons at the bar are kind of sort of throw the bum out. He says, "All right, I'll paint a portrait of the woman I loved, and I'll tell you the story. I was a painter, believe it or not. I was once a prosperous painter. I fell in love with this young woman, and she fell in love with another man, and he swept her away. And ever since then, I was so devastated, I fell apart, and now I'm down on my luck. But I'll paint her portrait on the floor if you'll buy me a drink. And he paints the portrait, and then the last line, with a shriek, he falls dead. That's the way the poem goes.
By 1910, 1915, a lot of people were considering this a ghost town. There were people that wanted to leave up here. They were going to Denver in a lot of cases if they were merchants. They wanted to sell their houses and they couldn't because nobody would buy them. And so they would actually just walk away from the house. They would just board it up and walk away from it. And that never really stopped because mining never truly came back after about 1918, 1919.
In the 20s, there was a time when the Opera House came close to being torn down, and actually Burroughs living in there, I believe, and you know, and it was made into a movie house. But I think Ann Evans, you know, took over that deal. She revived the whole thing. It's, you know, it's a miracle that it survived.
In 1930, at the depths of the Depression, this sensational opera house, after having had Charles Dickens and all kinds of other people on its stage, was now being used in the main floor to stable cows and in the balcony to hold the county records and something else. So Ann Evans and Ida Cruz McFarland traipsed up to the mountains and looked at this building and decided, yes, next summer they were going to have an opera festival. And they did.
They sold chairs in the Opera House, and those chairs at that point in 1932, which, let's remember, was the height of the Depression, those chairs were $500 a piece. Ann Evans went up and down 16th Street in Denver, pigeonholing bankers and everybody else to raise this money. And they did, and the opening night was a big deal, not just for Denver, not just for Colorado, not obviously just for Central City Opera, but for the country at that point, because there was nothing going on. People had no money. It was a really bad time, and for somebody to be starting something new in the middle of that, in the middle of nowhere, truly in the middle of nowhere, was a really unusual thing. A woman that, what was her name, McLean, that owned the Hope Diamond in the 30s. McLean, I think was her father's name, or she ended up marrying the guy that owned the Washington Post. She was here opening night in 1932 wearing the Hope Diamond. I mean, it just, there's a craziness about all this.
Now, there are so many stories about how the face came to be painted. Pascal Quackenbush, that was his real name, local artists, were engaged to restore the murals and the painting on the ceiling, which is very nice in the bar. They also engaged Herndon Davis to work on the murals, Denver artist. Davis was working here, and Pancho was helping him because Pancho did painting also. I mean, you know, real painting also. And they'd been hitting the bottle through the whole thing, and just as a lark, and to help finish off the bottle, Herndon Davis decided to paint a picture of his fiancée on the floor, inspired by that Victorian poem, which has nothing to do with us, has to do with the Klondike gold rush. It was just a lark, and Pancho helped him a little bit, you know, holding, I don't know what he did, but anyway, he was there. So they left, and Davis did not sign it because he thought it was going to be disappearing the next morning.
And there's endless stories about how she was saved from near demolition. Carolyn Bancroft, a historian here, claims that she was the only one sober enough to push a table over the face the night it was painted to keep people from walking on it, or peeing on it, or spitting on it, or all the things that could have happened to it.
The identity of the woman in the painting, though, was a mystery for a very long time. A lot of people thought it might have been Ann Evans. It wasn't. A lot of people thought it was Baby Doe. It wasn't. It was actually Herndon Davis's wife, Juanita. But that was kept secret until he died in 1962, because he was drunk in a bar when he painted it, and Juanita worked for the Prohibition movement in Denver. So apparently she didn't think it was a good advertisement for what she was trying to do. She actually denied to her dying day that it was her face. But Davis confessed it right before he died. There was a dentist in Denver who wanted him to paint a face on the floor, and he said, "I want you to paint the same one you painted in Central City." And Davis said to him, "You know that's my wife. Do you really want her face on your floor?" And he said, "No, I don't." And so he did a painting of the dentist's wife, and it is supposedly still there in the house in Denver.
The actual face has a frame around it, and now it has plexiglass over it, and it has brass bars around it, so you can't really get to it. It started to fade a little bit, and you know, to preserve it, it has all of these things around it.
I mean, you look at it, and it looks as though that face is coming up out of the floorboards. There's something strange. The copies that we've made to use over when we do the piece don't give that impression at all.
There is a Mona Lisa, a come hither, a wariness, or something to left up the individual interpreter.
I think it makes perfect sense that she's looking behind her. I think she's trying to get away from her past. I really think she wants to get out of that bar. She wants to get out of the circumstances that she's in.
It is not by any means the only face on a barroom floor in the country. There's one, I think, in Boston. There's one in Arizona. I have heard that there is one in Alaska. I think there is one down south somewhere, but I forget where it is. But the one that's here is the most famous one.
I have one story where I told a lady that it had been painted by one of Columbus's sailors because he missed his wife so much.
Yeah, we had a lady that lived in town and used to run tours in the Teller House. And I followed along behind the tour one day, and the stuff she was telling those people was just unbelievable, and 90% of it was not true. But that's sort of how these, you know, legends, folk legends or whatever, are created.
The face very quickly became an icon of Central City. People would trade off of it, they would promote it in their businesses, in their advertisements, but there were also those who wanted to respond to it. And the most famous response was the Fanny on the ceiling, which was at the Glory Hole Tavern on Main Street. The Glory Hole was owned by a woman named Emmy Wilson. The Fanny was born in 1949. During the New Year's Eve party for the previous year, Emmy Wilson had gone up to the second floor of the bar to get something, and she passed a hole in the floor that had been cut through it to install a dumbwaiter so that she could get food from the second floor kitchen down to the first floor bar.
'Twas a quiet night which didn't seem right in the Glory Hole saloon. Those that were there would just sit and stare as they heard each ragtime tune.
'Twas a quiet night, which didn't seem right in the Glory Hole saloon. Those that were
As she was passing the hole, she just got this crazy idea and lifted the cover off of it and lowered herself down through it. So the people who were sitting at the bar down below saw her kicking legs and her fanny.
Came a dog, a horse, and a cart. The door flew wide open and just outside a leering face appeared. 'Twas the carnival man who was driving the van.
It led to the slogan of the bar, which was "Bottoms up at the glory hole," and it also inspired a group of patrons to have a painting done by a local artist, Margaret Kerfoot. They got a piece of a backdrop from the Opera House, and Kerfoot had Emmy Wilson pose by bending over the beer cooler in the glory hole. She did the painting of her rear end. They then cut it out and put it up on the ceiling of the bar, and that became the Fanny on the ceiling, which then in turn led Sid Squibb to write the poem on the Fanny on the ceiling that connects the face and the Fanny.
Not a bomb, and explained how she'd lost her head. She took up with a miner, now what could be finer? But she never knew where to stop. She found her another, much more like a brother.
And so to this day, in her own unique way, she is still very much to be seen, with her face in one place and her bass up in space, with a block and a half between.
Up in space, with a block and a half in between, a block and a half in between, with a block and a half in between.
A friend of mine some years ago was working as a volunteer for the Opera Association, and one of her jobs was to go through the Opera House and dust off. We used to have those kitchen chairs in there for years, and she was in there one time. The curtain was closed on the stage. She was dusting off the chairs and all that, and she heard rehearsal going on behind the curtain. And she said, "Wow, they're really working a play," because they used to do a play in August up here. And so she went out the side door backstage to get some clean rags and looked out on the stage, and it was empty. I thought, well, that's strange. They must have gone home. Went back into the theater, and the rehearsal was still going on behind the curtain. And she swears this is true.
My name is Leanna Jonas, and I'm part of an all-girl paranormal group named Spirit Realm Investigative Project. We specialize in the town of Black Hawk and Central City, Colorado. We have done over 17 locations in this area, and we feel we're pretty well known even with the spirits as far as haunts go. We have come to find out that the spirits in this town, just like back in the day, rotate amongst themselves. We can go in one location, 2 weeks later go in another, and still pick up on the same entity. So we truly believe that they're still living in their time in this town, but now it's our time. You know, I really, offhand, I would say there is at least a good 1,000 spirits in this area.
They had a group of ghost hunters in the Teller house a month or two before we even moved up in May. So it was sometime in April or March. They came up here at night, late, and did all of their, investigative stuff. And, they told me that there was a little girl ghost in my office. I haven't seen the child, haven't heard the child, but anyway, there's supposed to be the ghost of the first doorman at the Opera House. He's supposed to be around, and our previous historic properties manager says he had run into him on many occasions. Maybe I'm just not one of those people. I mean, maybe they just don't appear to me. It's possible.
There was a gentleman that we contacted in the Gilpin County Jail downstairs. He was shot over gold and then buried alive He was still alive in the walls downstairs, and we connected with him also.
Where was this?
This was at the Gilpin County Jail down the street, and it was on the back steps, and he was sealed in the wall.
In concrete?
In concrete.
Bob Darling, who's still a good friend, said to me, Henry, I'd like to talk to you about The Face on the Barroom Floor. I listened to your demo tape, and I like your music, and I'd like to try something that's maybe a half hour long. We could perform with the apprentices in the bar, in the telehouse bar, where the face is actually on the floor. Bob is one of these people who gets great inspirations and tries them. You know, it's like Leonard Bernstein said to Stephen Sondheim, if you're going to fall off the highest rung. Don't fall off the bottom rung. Take chances. Robert does this. He's just that kind of a guy. And he took a chance on me. He didn't know me. I'd never written an opera that was played to any great extent, any opera house certainly. But he took a chance. And he said it'll be performed 2 or 3 times a day with 3 casts by the apprentice program. In the bar with 3 instruments. My first reaction was one of shock. I said, he wants me to write an opera in a bar. How the hell am I going to do that?
Henry's original request was thought he was going to get a full 3-act opera, and I was going to base it loosely inspired, you may say, by this poem, and I wrote the plot outline for a 3-act opera, and I had barely sent it to him, and he said, "I'm sorry, John, now they're telling me that it can only be a short 1-act opera." So I had to completely set aside that elaborate plot and come up with a short plot. By the time we were told this, I'm going to say it was, let's say, October, November of '77, and they wanted to premiere it in July 1978. So we were under some pressure to do this very quickly.
I woke up and it kind of all became clear to me. I said, yes, there is a way to do this. It has to be very tight dramatically. It has to be very tight musically. Things have to happen quickly. And so I called John and told him the news. And his reaction, I think, was, in a bar? You mean they're going to really perform in a bar? I said, yep, that's the set. And we've got our set, and we got the face on the floor. You know, you don't have a guy died, you know who's going to cry about that. You know, you want the soprano to die. You know, we did quite a bit of changing to make that poem into the plot that we did.
The right story would not have made a good opera. The right story, it's very funny, and I enjoy the right story. I get a kick out of the right story, but it wouldn't have made a good opera. I mean, you can't have Ann Evans singing, "I'm going to fire you," and get this thing off the floor.
And Henry went back with John Bowman, the librettist, and they wrestled with this darn thing. And they tried to figure out what in the world are we going to do. And they came up with the most perfect solution for this commission possible. And what Henry has done in the opera is create another layer of myth onto this whole thing. It is very, very interesting in how something as simple, seemingly simple, touches you. And I think that when you hear the trio Henry has written at the center of that piece, if you don't get the hair on the back of your neck standing up because it's so exquisite.
When I compose, and I think this is probably true with most composers, we don't really know, you know, that something is stronger than something else. We have to wait. We just write what we feel. I'm very conscious of melody. It's my favorite thing, next to harmony, above harmony actually, but they go together. You know, the melody and the harmony really do go together like a marriage. And I am very conscious of trying to write melodies that are moving to me and hopefully will touch other people.
Our job as singers is to tell a story and to join melody and word. And Henry makes that job very accessible, and it's not always easy, but it's clear, and there's not a struggle in getting there, and it's not that he doesn't cover many emotions. He does. It's how he does it is in a way that it has a lot of meaning to me.
He'll stretch the voice to the limits, and especially if he knows who he's writing for, but he really, he's really one of those composers that writes very well for the voice. And not everyone does that. And so I appreciate him for that. And not that it's always easy, because it isn't, but it's well written. He sets text well. He knows the limits. He knows how high somebody can stay for a very long time and then bring them down.
Frankly, my most important inspiration is my wife, Kathy.
It was hard for him because when he was in college and at the conservatory, and that was the big thing, that the 12-tone and the dissonant music, and that just wasn't. He tried to change, and that was just a disaster because it just wasn't what he did. And so then I think that was one reason why he wanted to go into film music, because that was something that he felt he would be more in line with what he wanted to do. And so it was hard but he did feel better when he just was true to himself and what he wanted to do.
People may not know this. This world, this composition world, is very severely divided. And it's like the Republicans and Democrats right now. They don't talk to each other. They vilify, they hate each other.
I taught Henry Mollicone orchestration. He'd come to this studio, in fact, though it was a long time ago.
Why did you consent to teach him privately if this was something that you didn't normally do?
I don't remember. The answer is I don't remember, but what can I say? I bet he knows why. I just don't know. I liked him. I liked him very much, and I liked his music. And I don't know, and he was straight. That should have dulled my interest, but it didn't. There's something very nice about him, and I just felt like doing it.
Julius Rudel taught me what opera is about. Julius Rudel is so much the man of the theater in opera. People like Beverly Sills and Carreras was just starting his career. I mean, I didn't know that I was around these important things. I was just a kid. I was in my 20s. I had just gotten out of graduate school. But I learned more about opera from working 6 days a week in an opera house than I could have in any graduate school, reading, studying, whatever. I learned about La Voce, I learned about drama, I learned about pacing, and Julius was very much strict with his staff, but in a benign way.
I engaged him as part of the music staff of Sydney Next to the Opera, and he was an excellent pianist, and he knew the repertory, and he was a wonderful member of the company as long as he stayed.
Well, the story is we were at a benefit for the Face on the Barroom floor. And one of the ways they were going to raise some money is they did an auction of this little musical trick that Henry does. And people bid to give him special numbers.
The scale is equivalent to numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And below 1 is 0. Now I have the artistic license to use a black key when necessary, like 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So the numbers correspond to the notes. So she's got 6, 2, 3, 5, 1. And that's how it works, okay?
I've enjoyed singing Henry's music for many years, and I have
always appreciated the spiritual side of his music, the poetic nature of it, the poems that he chooses have to deal with life and death.
He's never yelled, "That's a wrong note." I mean, he'll point it out, but it's very low key. But what I always find interesting about working with him is he'll bring up something that just immediately makes it better. I mean, I think his power of observation, he would probably tell you he doesn't do that well, but it would be untrue, you know. Even I've seen him coaching other groups, and he'll just say, you know, that's interesting, but what about if you did this, or what about if you did that? And the minute they do, it just makes the piece is already vastly different in a very, very positive way.
I was working at a big church in Palo Alto at the time, and I was going through some music, as I want to do for my choirs, and I saw his name on this piece of music. And I thought, I do, it was called Hear Me Redeemer.
Oh, that one.
And it was published by Galaxy, and I thought, oh, yeah, he's that name on the door at Santa Clara. And I played through it, and I loved it.
Henry's music is one of the most original voices in American music today. I think he's really truly one of the great writers of particularly lyric music for the singing theater.
But Henry said, I have another idea that I'd really rather write, and it's an idea about doing an opera about trickster tales. I said, what are those? And he described these trickster tales from the Indian culture, and I said, I don't know any of those. So he sent me a couple of books, Coyote, where various figures are the mischief maker. In some cultures, Coyote was the trickster, in others, the crow, and others, the fox. And he sent me one book, and the first book I read, I was very disappointed because these were very obviously Aesop fables that had somehow crept into the Indian culture. He sent me a couple of other books that were legitimate Indian trickster tales, and they were wonderful. So I got excited, he got excited. Henry had taken the text that I wrote, and there was a lot of melisma, a lot of extension of the vowels with a lot of vocalizing, and I worried about it. I think I was still, in some ways, I was still writing a musical rather than an opera. When Henry first played it for me, I thought, oh dear, this is not what I expected. Then, little by little, I got used, and we talked about that. He convinced me that what he was doing was legitimate, and that ultimately, when I heard an opera singer sing it, I would buy it, which I did.
I would like my larger operas to be performed more. I certainly would. But I'm in the same boat as most composers, you know, where they have 2 or 3 performances. I think Dominic Argento is a great composer. Yet, if you look in opera news, how many times do you get to see The Voyage of Edgar Allan Poe? or any of his other operas except Postcard. In fact, Dominic told me once, he said, you know, you look at me as this big success, but I get a premiere, an occasional revival, and the rest of these things sit on the shelf. I feel lucky and grateful that there are a few pieces out there of mine, A Face being one, a couple of choral works, my Beatitude Mass, that are getting played a lot. And it's funny when you go back and hear your works over the years, they're like old friends. And I've gotten to see and perform in Face more than any of my other works.
I was told about 2 productions by a composer named Henry Mollicone. One was a children's show, and the other was The Face on the Barroom Floor, which was, I was told, was a charming idea. It was a chamber work for, I believe, 3 singers and 3 musicians, and it was performed in a bar restaurant.
We would do dress rehearsals in the bar, and we wouldn't sell any tickets. We would just, you know, the people would, whoever was in there swilling down a drink, and there was a little honky-tonk piano player in the corner, and Henry very beautifully scored it to start with another little honky-tonk-esque piano, which we had set up at the other end of the bar. So the honky-tonk piano player takes a break, the other piano player starts up a cello and a flute, and we're into it. Then these singers entered from the street talking very loudly. And after that, we're all in it. And you can see these people who had never seen an opera, heard an opera, and they think, oh my God, what have we done? You know, we came in here for a lovely drink, and now what of it? What's going on?
So I went to the restaurant, and at a certain point, the lights were lowered, and the opera started. It was just absolutely charming. I thought, what a splendid idea this is.
And then they would sit there and they would watch this thing, and they would hear this thing, and then they would be drawn into it, and you could just see the magic of the opera taking over them. For, oh my goodness, 30, 40 years, Face on the Barroom Floor was the most popular American opera and most produced American opera going.
He writes damn well. That opera, A Face on the Barroom Floor, as I listen to it again now, I just sat there, you know, this is damn good. I mean, in its way, it's not what I would do, and so what? But in its way, it's all perfectly made.
Feel about an opera that's made consisting of 3 instrumentalists, 3 singers that can be literally performed in any bar on the universe.
Yeah, I would call all of that genius, or very close to it.
Then they did it out at a like Western fair, out of town a little bit. And so I went. It was like 10 o'clock in the morning or 11:30 in the morning, something like that. And they were going to do two performances that day. And it was equally brilliant to the first time. Totally different setting, different cast, but it was equally brilliant. And I thought then, oh my gosh, this is really all it's cracked up to be.
There aren't that many parallels, really. No. No, it's really a jewel.
It's not something that is going to be staged at a major opera house. However, there are major opera houses like New York City Opera in its heyday that took it on tour. So it does go on tour with some of the bigger companies. It's been performed in smaller venues by many of the bigger companies, including, I could go on and on, many of the large companies, but not on the major stage. So I guess that's what they mean as an underground opera. If they want to call it underground, at least it's somewhere on the ground, not, on the shelf.
It's very effective writing and very fluid, flexible. It's really a little classic, a little American classic.
Interesting how
there should be more ballrooms available.
It covers terrific emotion and in a very honest way. And some of my favorite parts are the opening and the ending. They just take you to a place immediately. It's, in my other experience, a piece that has done that in my life is Pelléas by Debussy. You know, you hear four notes of Pelléas, and all of a sudden you're in La La Land. You know, wonderful Debussy La La Land. With Henry, you know, you feel like, where are my cowboy boots? And you know, I want to see this. I want to see this face on the floor. You know.
Atmospheric, just like a movie set.
Did you enjoy the opera?
I can't understand it, Isabel. In town all this time, yet you never come here.
I don't have time. I'm so busy rehearsing.
That's the spirit that makes you the star around here.
I hear you. I'm just in a chorus.
But to me, you're the prima donna. You stick with it, you make a great Violetta.
Violetta! Now you found my fantasy.
Don't make it, I know, you're the real thing. Like this bar. So authentic. And a real saloon piano player. Say, how about something slow and easy?
Hang up, mister.
Isabel, let's toast to your future.
Really, I shouldn't drink.
Come on, you've plenty of time before the performance. Sit down. Oh, give me a bar with a tender star. Say, fella, what's your best champagne? Domestic or imported? Aha, now that's the way to put an Easterner down. Like a pro. Did you hear that, Isabel? Fresh, of course, for a genuine opera star. Over here. And someday you can say your champagne launched her career. Here then, tell her it's compliments of the house.
No, Harry, don't let him.
Why not? You have to get used to being spoiled. What's this? A face. A face. But here on the floor. What an enchantress she is. And those eyes, they seem to be glowing. I'll bet there's a tale behind that. There's a tale behind everything out here. I don't think you'd believe it. Come on, it's just what we need to go with the champagne, right, my dear?
Well, if you...
There, the prima donna demands it. Well, I could never resist an opera star. So laugh if you will, but it's true. Solid as this very bar, handed down from barman to barman. town was crawling with men seeking their fortune, but the one nugget they all found was the bar girl, Madeline! Spite of all those mining camps, come and take, come and plan for your future in the golden west. Last night your love, my shirt struck it rich when I hired you. So you take and you pay for the golden oil, which rolls and you cares for your triumph as a liquid gold. Here you are, coming to the first of all those friendly bars. Come and drink, come and toast to the future in the golden west. Famous, just you wait and see. Oh, famous, to sing and dance for a room full of men. Oh, loving me. Once I had one love, one man to satisfy. Life was sacred to our young hearts. What times on walls or some innocent years. Hey, mister, where do you think you're going? Going? I'm here! I want a drink for a dry trapper. All right, but don't annoy the customers. Annoy 'em? Why, nobody's annoyed unless their glasses are empty. I've been traveling on dry, dusty trails, and I come here to find dry, dusty glasses. Drinks for all these dry travelers on me. Fine, Evelyn, sing the song about the young lovers. I'm not in the mood. Hey, I demand music with my drinks. all right, mister. Pay up and move on. Move on, I will. Pay up, I can't. Oh, you lying lizard, then you'll pay with blood. With blood, I won't. But with red, with green, with gold, and yellow hues, I will pay you well. I'll paint you a picture of the only woman I ever loved. Right here. My drinks are paid for with money, mister. Please give me a chance. She's a beautiful young woman. She'll be a sun to dry your thirsty patrons. Well, maybe a beauty on the floor will keep the fellas happy. Paint your picture, mister, and move on. You'll see, when love and art conspire, you will have peace. He paints the portrait of his love. I wonder why, but I don't care. He paints the portrait of his love. He's floating here. I stay. Insult to paint her on this floor. Still beautiful and still my love. I can't believe this. Madeline, is this true?
John, it was years ago. I was young.
Madeline, leave me. We can begin again. away from this hole. Ah, you foul flusher! You insult my bar and my woman! I'll teach you a lesson.
No, John! No!
A lesson you'll never forget! That's the story of the beautiful face on the barroom floor. You know, friends, I must have told this story 100 times. Different folks passing through here. And it still gives me a chill. As the story goes, the spirit of Madeline to this day haunts this bar, always seeking her revenge. Bravo, bravo! Let's make a toast to Madeline!
Larry, we must go!
Oh, come on, have another drink. You of all people, it's such a tall tale, like one of your opera plots. That may be, but it's as real as this.
Please put that away! Crimes always scare me.
Relax. This cold, silent barrel said all it had to say. On thy day, Madeline was sent to her grave.
The gun that killed Madeline.
It was passed down from barman to barman, along with the story. Maybe the face I'll buy, but the pistol, that's too much.
Larry, come on! You know I'm in early rehearsal.
What's the matter, Isabel? I'm afraid of that tale, or that face. A strange enchantress, Madeline. What a funny tale. Here's to you, Madeline. A face on the barroom floor.
Larry, please, I need you to.
Let her go, mister. She needs you. Look at those eyes calling me. How could you come here with him? Surely you can dance. The face of a barroom floor, la 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 la. This door is closing. The face of a barroom floor, la 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 la. That's enough. Be my melon, my own enchantress.
Mary, stop!
That's enough. Be my melon, my own enchantress. Take her home. She's had enough. I've had enough of your tough Western talk, mister. You can't talk that way about a lady, about a star. She was my star. She was my star. She was my star before you ever set eyes on her. I was her only love. I was her only love. Her only love. Wasn't good enough for you. With your new lover, this bar is closed. I'll teach you. Funny face. Move on, mister. Madeline.
The composer of The Face on the Barroom Floor, Henry Mollicone.
was a balmy summer evening, and a goodly crowd was there that well nigh filled Joe's barroom at the corner of the square. As songs and witty stories came through the open door, a vagabond crept slowly in and posed upon the floor. "Where did it come from?" someone said. The wind has blown it in. What does it want? Another cried. Some whiskey, rum, or gin?
Here, Toby, sick 'em. If your stomach is equal to the work, I wouldn't touch him with a fork. He's filthy as a Turk.
This badinage the poor wretch took with stoical good grace. In fact, he smiled, as though he thought he had struck the proper place. Come, boys, I know there's kindly hearts among so good a crowd. To be in such good company would make a deacon proud. Give me a drink, that's what I want.
I'm out of funds, you know. When I had cash to treat the gang, this lad was never slow. What? You laugh as though you think this pocket never held a sou. I once was fixed as well, my boys, as any of you.
Ah, there, thanks. That's braced me nicely. God bless you one and all. Next time I pass this good saloon, I'll make another call. Give you a song? No, I can't do that. My singing days are past. My voice is cracked, my throat's worn out, and my lungs are going fast.
Give me another whiskey, and I'll tell you what to do. I'll tell you a funny story, and in fact I'll promise too, that I was ever a decent man, not one of you would think. But I was, some 4 or 5 years back. Say, give me another drink. Fill her up, Joe. I want to put some life into this old frame.
Such little drinks to a bum like me are miserably tame. 5 fingers, that's the scene, and corking and whiskey too. Well, here's luck, boys, and landlord. My best respects to you.
You've treated me pretty kindly, and I'd like to tell you how I came to be this dirty sap you see before you now. As I told you once, I was a man with muscle frame and health, but for a blunder ought to have made considerable wealth.
I was a painter, not one that dabbed on bricks or wood, but an artist, and for my age I was rated pretty good. I worked hard at my canvas and bidding fair to rise, and gradually I saw the star of fame before my eyes. I made a picture, perhaps you've seen. It's called The Chase of Fame. It brought me £1,500 and added to my name.
It was then I met a woman, here comes the funny part, with eyes that petrified my brain and sank into my heart. Why don't you laugh? It's funny that the vagabond you see could ever have a woman and expect her love from me. But it was so. And for a month or two, her smiles were freely given, and when her loving lips touched mine, I thought I was in heaven. Boys, did you ever see a girl for whom your soul you'd give with a form like Venus de Milo, too beautiful to live, with eyes that would beat the Kohinoor, a wealth of chestnut hair? If so, it was she. For boys, there never was another half so fair.
I was working on a portrait one afternoon in May of a fair-haired boy, a friend of mine, who lived across the way. My Madeline admired him, and much to my surprise, she said she'd like to know the lad who had such dreamy eyes. She didn't take long to find him. Before the month had flown, my friend had stolen my darling, and I was left alone. And ere a year of misery had passed above my head, that jewel I treasured so had tarnished and was dead. That's why I took to drink, boys, why I never see you smile. I thought you'd be amused, boys, and laughing all the while.
What's the matter, friend? There's a teardrop in your eye. Come laugh like me, it's only babes and women that should cry. Say, boys, if you give me just another whiskey and I'll be glad, I'll draw right here the picture of that face that drove me mad. Give me that piece of chalk with which you marked the baseball score. You shall see the lovely Madeline upon the barroom floor.
And with chalk in hand, the vagabond began to sketch a face that well might buy the soul of any man. Then, as he placed another lock upon that shapely head, with a fearful shriek, he leaped and fell across the picture, dead.